The morning mist hung low over the rocky terrain of the Cunard province as Staff Sergeant Maria Santos adjusted the scope on her M24 sniper rifle. The weapon had become an extension of herself over the past 18 months in Afghanistan, its familiar weight bringing comfort in an environment where comfort was a luxury few could afford. At 26 years old, Maria had already earned respect among her fellow Marines through countless missions that showcased not just her exceptional marksmanship, but her ability to remain calm under pressure that would break lesser soldiers. The forward operating base had been established 3 weeks earlier in a strategic valley that intelligence suggested was a key route for insurgent movement between Pakistan and the main population centers. Colonel James Mitchell, the commanding officer, had personally requested Maria for this operation after reviewing her service record. Her confirmed kills numbered 43, but, more importantly, she had never missed a shot when it mattered most. In the Marine Corps, reputation meant everything, and Maria Santos had earned hers through blood, sweat, and an almost supernatural ability to read wind patterns and calculate trajectories that seemed impossible to others. The base housed exactly 230 Marines, a number that would soon become etched in military history. These weren't fresh recruits but seasoned veterans who had volunteered for what everyone knew was a dangerous assignment. The location offered tactical advantages for monitoring enemy movement, but it also meant they were isolated, surrounded by terrain that could easily conceal hostile forces. The nearest reinforcements were 45 minutes away by helicopter, assuming weather conditions permitted flight operations. Maria had grown up in a small Texas town where hunting was not just recreation but a way of life. Her father, a Vietnam veteran, had taught her to shoot when she was 12 years old, emphasizing patience, discipline, and respect for the weapon. By age 16, she could consistently hit targets at distances that impressed seasoned hunters twice her age. When she enlisted in the Marines immediately after high school, her drill instructors quickly recognized her natural talent and recommended her for sniper training. The sniper school at Quantico had been the most challenging experience of her life. The physical demands were brutal, but the mental pressure was even more intense. Students were required to remain motionless for hours while maintaining perfect focus on targets that could appear and disappear in seconds. Many capable Marines washed out because they couldn't handle the psychological strain of knowing that one missed shot could mean the death of fellow soldiers. Maria not only survived the training but graduated at the top of her class, earning the respect of instructors who had initially doubted whether a woman could handle the demands of the role. Her first deployment to Iraq had been a baptism by fire. Urban warfare presented challenges different from the controlled environment of training, with civilians mixed among combatants and split-second decisions that could haunt a soldier forever. Maria's first confirmed kill came during a firefight in Fallujah when an insurgent sniper had pinned down an entire squad of Marines. She had spotted the muzzle flash from a rooftop 600 meters away and eliminated the threat with a single shot. The successful mission had saved at least 6 American lives, but Maria found no celebration in taking a life, only grim satisfaction in protecting her fellow Marines. Afghanistan presented its own unique challenges. The mountainous terrain offered excellent vantage points for snipers, but the extreme distances and unpredictable weather conditions tested every skill she had developed. The thin air at high altitude affected bullet trajectory in ways that required constant adjustment and recalculation. Additionally, the enemy forces they faced were often experienced fighters who had been battling foreign armies for years and knew the terrain intimately. The forward operating base had been constructed with defensive positions in mind, but everyone understood that their location made them vulnerable to coordinated attacks. Intelligence reports suggested increased enemy activity in the region, with several large groups of fighters moving through the area under cover of darkness. Colonel Mitchell had ordered enhanced security protocols, but, with limited personnel and vast amounts of territory to monitor, they could only do so much to prepare for potential threats. Maria's position was on the highest point of the base, a reinforced observation post that provided excellent visibility in all directions. Her spotter, Corporal David Chen, was a 22-year-old from California who had proven himself reliable under pressure. The partnership between sniper and spotter was crucial for success, requiring absolute trust and seamless communication. Chen's job was to identify targets, calculate range and wind conditions, and watch for threats while Maria focused on the shot itself. The intelligence briefing the previous evening had been routine, with reports of possible enemy movement, but nothing that suggested immediate danger. Colonel Mitchell had emphasized the importance of their mission, explaining that their position was crucial for monitoring a suspected weapons smuggling route. The information they gathered could potentially save hundreds of lives by preventing attacks on larger military installations and civilian populations. Maria had spent the evening cleaning her weapon and checking her equipment with the methodical precision that had become second nature. Every piece of gear was inspected and tested, from her rangefinder to the communication equipment that kept her connected to the command post. In her experience, equipment failures during combat were often the result of inadequate preparation, and she refused to let such oversights endanger her fellow Marines. The other Marines on the base represented every branch of the service and came from diverse backgrounds across America. There were farm boys from the Midwest who had grown up hunting and city kids from New York who had learned to shoot in the Corps. Despite their different origins, they had bonded through shared hardships and the knowledge that they could depend on each other when the situation became desperate. Maria had earned their respect not because they viewed her differently as a woman, but because she had proven herself capable of performing her duties at the highest level. Sleep had come fitfully the night before, interrupted by the distant sounds that were common in the Afghan mountains. Maria had learned to distinguish between the harmless noises of wildlife and the subtle sounds that might indicate human movement. Her training had taught her to trust her instincts, and something about the previous night had felt different, though she couldn't identify exactly what had triggered her concern. The morning routine began before sunrise, as it did every day. Maria performed her equipment checks and reviewed the intelligence updates that had come in overnight. Nothing unusual was reported, but the lack of enemy contact over the past week had made everyone slightly uneasy. In their experience, extended quiet periods often preceded major attacks, as enemy forces took time to organize and position themselves for coordinated assaults. As the sun began to rise over the mountains, casting long shadows across the valley, Maria settled into her position and began scanning the terrain through her scope. The morning light revealed the same rocky landscape she had memorized over the past 3 weeks, with its countless hiding places and potential ambush sites. Her job was to watch for any sign of movement that didn't belong, any indication that hostile forces might be preparing to attack their position. The radio crackled with routine communications between the various observation posts around the perimeter. Everything seemed normal, with sentries reporting no unusual activity during the night shift. Colonel Mitchell's voice came over the communications system, providing the daily briefing and reminding everyone to maintain vigilance despite the apparent calm. Maria adjusted her position slightly, ensuring she had clear fields of fire in all directions while remaining concealed from potential enemy observation. The rocky terrain provided excellent natural camouflage, but she had also constructed additional concealment using materials available at the base. Her position was nearly invisible from ground level, while still providing her with excellent visibility across the approaches to their location. Corporal Chin joined her in the observation post, carrying the communications equipment and additional ammunition that might be needed during an extended engagement. He had also brought coffee and rations, though Maria rarely ate much during operations, preferring to maintain complete focus on her assigned sector of responsibility. The two Marines began their systematic observation of the terrain, using binoculars and the rifle scope to examine every potential hiding place within effective range. The process was methodical and required intense concentration, as enemy forces were often skilled at concealment and movement. Missing a single fighter could mean the difference between success and disaster for the entire base. As the morning progressed, the temperature began to rise, creating heat shimmer that would affect long-range shots later in the day. Maria made mental notes about wind patterns and atmospheric conditions, information that would be crucial if she needed to engage targets at maximum range. The mountain environment created unpredictable air currents that could dramatically affect bullet trajectory, requiring constant adjustment and recalculation. The routine of observation was interrupted only by periodic radio checks and the rotation of personnel at other positions around the base. Everything appeared normal, with local wildlife moving through the area and no signs of human activity beyond their own forces. However, Maria's instincts continued to suggest that something was different about this particular morning, though she couldn't identify any concrete evidence to support her concern. Colonel Mitchell made his rounds to each position, checking on the readiness of his Marines and reviewing defensive preparations. When he reached Maria's observation post, he spent several minutes discussing the tactical situation and her assessment of potential threat areas. His confidence in her abilities was evident, and he made it clear that her position was considered crucial to the overall defense of the base. The conversation was interrupted by a radio report from one of the perimeter positions indicating possible movement in a distant valley. Maria immediately focused her scope on the reported area, scanning methodically for any sign of hostile activity. After several minutes of careful observation, she concluded that the movement was likely local wildlife, but the incident served as a reminder that the situation could change rapidly and without warning. As the morning wore on, the base continued its normal routine, with Marines performing maintenance on equipment, conducting training exercises, and preparing for potential operations. The sense of normalcy was comforting, but Maria knew from experience that in Afghanistan, peaceful moments could be shattered without warning by sudden and devastating attacks. The intelligence updates continued to indicate possible enemy activity in the region, but nothing that suggested immediate threat to their position. However, Maria had learned to trust her instincts over intelligence reports, and something about the morning continued to feel wrong. She increased her vigilance, paying particular attention to areas where large groups of fighters might be able to approach undetected. Unknown to the Marines at the forward operating base, enemy forces had indeed been moving into position throughout the night, using routes and concealment techniques perfected through years of fighting in the Afghan mountains. The attack that was being prepared would test every aspect of their training and equipment, and the survival of all 230 Marines would ultimately depend on the skills and courage of individuals like Maria Santos who had dedicated their lives to protecting their fellow soldiers. The first indication that something was terribly wrong came not from Maria's scope, but from the sudden silence that fell over the mountain wildlife. Birds that had been calling to each other across the valley abruptly stopped, and even the insects seemed to pause in their morning chorus. Maria had learned to read these natural warning signs during her time in Afghanistan, understanding that animals often sensed danger long before human technology could detect it. She immediately alerted Corporal Chen, who began scanning their assigned sector more intensively while reaching for the radio to report their observations to the command post. Before he could transmit, the silence was shattered by the distinctive whistle of incoming mortar rounds, followed immediately by explosions that shook the ground beneath their position. The attack began with devastating precision at exactly 0647 hours, time to catch the Marines during their morning routine when many were still emerging from their sleeping areas and defensive positions were not yet fully manned. The enemy had clearly conducted extensive reconnaissance, as their fire was concentrated on the most critical defensive positions and the command center where Colonel Mitchell was coordinating the base operations. Maria's training took over instantly, her body reacting before her conscious mind had fully processed the situation. She immediately began scanning for muzzle flashes and movement that would indicate the positions of enemy forces directing the mortar fire. The rocky terrain that provided such excellent concealment for their own position also offered countless hiding places for attackers who knew the area intimately. The intensity of the initial barrage suggested a force much larger than intelligence estimates had indicated. Mortar rounds were falling every few seconds, creating a continuous thunder that made communication difficult and filled the air with dust and debris. Several direct hits on defensive positions had already caused casualties, and Maria could hear the shouts of Marines calling for medical assistance over the chaos of the bombardment. Through her scope, Maria caught her first glimpse of enemy movement approximately 800 meters to the northeast, where figures were moving between rock formations in what appeared to be a coordinated advance on the base perimeter. She quickly calculated range and wind conditions while Corporal Chen attempted to establish radio contact with the command post to report the sighting. The communications equipment was functioning despite the ongoing bombardment, but the command post was dealing with multiple crisis situations simultaneously. Colonel Mitchell's voice could be heard coordinating defensive responses and calling for medical evacuation for the wounded, while also trying to establish contact with higher headquarters to request immediate reinforcement and air support. Maria's first shot of the engagement eliminated an enemy fighter who was setting up what appeared to be a rocket-propelled grenade launcher in a position that would have allowed him to target the main defensive positions. The 7.62mm round traveled the 800-meter distance in just over a second, striking the target center mass and neutralizing the threat before he could fire on her fellow Marines. The successful engagement immediately drew return fire from multiple positions, as enemy snipers who had been waiting for exactly this opportunity began targeting her observation post. Bullets cracked past overhead and struck the rocks around their position, forcing Maria and Corporal Chen to adjust their location while maintaining the ability to engage targets. The tactical situation was becoming clearer as more enemy positions revealed themselves through muzzle flashes and movement. Maria estimated at least 40 fighters in the immediate area, with more likely positioned in locations that had not yet been identified. The coordination of their attack suggested extensive planning and familiarity with the base layout, indicating that they had been under observation for some time. Corporal Chen managed to establish reliable communication with the command post, reporting their observations and requesting fire support coordination. Colonel Mitchell's response indicated that the situation was critical, with enemy forces attacking from multiple directions and several defensive positions already compromised. The base was effectively surrounded, with withdrawal not possible due to the terrain and the intensity of enemy fire. Maria's second engagement eliminated a machine gun team that was attempting to establish a position overlooking the main approaches to the base. The range was nearly 1,000 meters, requiring precise calculation for bullet drop and wind drift. The shot disrupted what could have been a devastating attack on Marines attempting to reach defensive positions, potentially saving multiple lives with a single well-placed round. The enemy forces were clearly experienced and well-equipped, using tactics that suggested previous combat against conventional military forces. They moved in small teams, used effective concealment, and coordinated their attacks to maximize pressure on multiple defensive positions simultaneously. The mortar fire continued with deadly accuracy, indicating that they had pre-registered targets and were firing from prepared positions. Radio communications revealed that several Marines had been wounded in the initial bombardment, including some in critical condition who required immediate medical evacuation. However, the intensity of enemy fire made it impossible for medical helicopters to attempt a landing, leaving the base medical personnel to treat the wounded under extremely dangerous conditions. Maria's third shot eliminated a spotter who was directing mortar fire from a concealed position on the eastern ridge. The elimination of this target caused a noticeable decrease in the accuracy of enemy indirect fire, providing some relief to the Marines who were attempting to organize defensive responses while under continuous bombardment. The enemy tactics suggested they intended to overwhelm the base through sustained pressure rather than a single massive assault. They were methodically targeting defensive positions, communication equipment, and medical facilities while positioning assault teams for what would likely be a coordinated ground attack once the defenses were sufficiently weakened. Colonel Mitchell's voice over the radio indicated that he was coordinating with higher headquarters to arrange air support and reinforcements, but the nearest assets were not immediately available due to other ongoing operations in the region. The Marines at the forward operating base would need to hold their position for at least several hours before help could arrive, assuming weather conditions permitted helicopter operations. Maria identified a cluster of enemy fighters who were moving into position for what appeared to be an assault on the western perimeter of the base. The range was challenging at nearly 1,200 meters, but she had confidence in her equipment and training. Her fourth shot eliminated the apparent leader of the group, causing confusion and disrupting their coordinated movement. The return fire was immediate and intense, with multiple enemy snipers concentrating their efforts on her general area. Corporal Chen spotted muzzle flashes from at least 3 different positions, all apparently trying to eliminate the sniper who had been causing significant disruption to their attack plans. Maria was forced to change position again, moving to an alternate firing position she had prepared for exactly this type of situation. The new position provided excellent concealment while maintaining fields of fire toward the primary threat areas. From this location, Maria could observe enemy movement while remaining largely invisible to return fire. Corporal Chen quickly repositioned the communications equipment and continued providing spotting assistance while monitoring radio traffic for updates on the overall tactical situation. The base perimeter was holding despite the intensity of the attack, with individual Marines demonstrating the training and courage that had made them some of the most effective fighting forces in the world. However, ammunition consumption was becoming a concern, as the sustained firefight was depleting supplies more rapidly than had been anticipated in defensive planning. Maria's fifth engagement eliminated an enemy mortar team that had been responsible for much of the indirect fire that was making movement around the base extremely dangerous. The shot required threading the bullet between rock formations at a range of nearly 1,000 meters, but the elimination of this target significantly reduced the immediate threat to Marines who were attempting to resupply defensive positions. Radio traffic indicated that several other observation posts around the perimeter were also engaging enemy forces, suggesting that the attack was indeed coming from multiple directions as intelligence had warned might be possible. The coordination required for such an assault indicated a level of planning and resources that exceeded previous enemy operations in the region. Colonel Mitchell's updates revealed that casualty reports were mounting, with several Marines requiring immediate medical attention that could not be provided under current conditions. The base medical personnel were performing admirably under impossible circumstances, but they needed the security that could only come from defeating the enemy assault or receiving reinforcement from outside forces. Maria identified movement that suggested the enemy was preparing for a coordinated ground assault on multiple sections of the perimeter. The mortar fire had decreased, likely indicating that the attackers were repositioning to avoid hitting their own forces during the final phase of their operation. This was the moment when the defensive capabilities of the base would face their ultimate test. Her sixth shot eliminated a fighter who was carrying what appeared to be explosive charges, likely intended for breaching the defensive positions that protected the main base facilities. The successful engagement prevented what could have been a catastrophic penetration of their defensive perimeter, but Maria could see that more assault teams were moving into position. The ammunition situation was becoming critical, with Corporal Chen reporting that they were down to approximately 60 rounds of sniper ammunition. At the current rate of engagement, this supply would last perhaps another hour of sustained combat, assuming targets continued to present themselves at the current frequency. Radio communications revealed that other positions around the base were experiencing similar ammunition concerns, while also dealing with wounded personnel and equipment damage from the sustained bombardment. The Marine Corps training that emphasized individual initiative and adaptation under pressure was being tested to its absolute limits. Maria's seventh engagement eliminated a machine gunner who had been suppressing one of the key defensive positions, allowing those Marines to reposition and establish better fields of fire against the approaching assault teams. The coordination between different defensive positions was crucial for maximizing their effectiveness against an enemy force that significantly outnumbered them. The tactical situation demanded split-second decisions about target priority, as multiple threats appeared simultaneously across her area of responsibility. Maria's training and experience allowed her to assess each situation rapidly and engage the targets that posed the greatest immediate danger to her fellow Marines, but the mental pressure of making such decisions continuously was enormous. Corporal Chen reported that radio traffic indicated air support might be available within the next 2 hours, assuming weather conditions remained acceptable for flight operations. However, the current tactical situation suggested that the enemy intended to complete their assault well before any outside assistance could arrive, making the next few hours critical for the survival of everyone at the base. The morning sun had risen higher, creating thermal currents that affected long-range shooting and providing better visibility for both friendly and enemy forces. Maria adjusted her calculations accordingly while maintaining continuous observation of the terrain where additional threats might appear without warning. Her eighth shot eliminated a sniper who had been targeting Marines attempting to resupply ammunition to forward positions. The counter-sniper engagement required patience and careful observation to identify the enemy position, as experienced snipers were skilled at concealment and rarely exposed themselves for more than a few seconds at a time. The enemy assault was entering its most dangerous phase, with ground forces moving closer to the base perimeter while maintaining covering fire from concealed positions. Maria realized that her role was evolving from long-range interdiction to close-range defense of critical positions, requiring different tactics and even greater precision under pressure. The assault intensified as enemy fighters closed to within 400 meters of the base perimeter, their movements becoming more desperate and coordinated as they sensed the opportunity to overwhelm the defensive positions. Maria could observe individual faces through her scope now, seeing the determination and fanaticism that drove these fighters to continue their attack despite the casualties they had already suffered from her precise shooting. Radio traffic from Colonel Mitchell indicated that 3 defensive positions had been compromised, with Marines forced to fall back to secondary positions while dragging their wounded with them. The western approach to the base was particularly threatened, or a large group of attackers had managed to advance using a series of rock formations that provided excellent concealment from most defensive positions. Maria shifted her focus to this critical area, identifying targets that posed the most immediate threat to the withdrawing Marines. Her ninth shot eliminated a fighter carrying a rocket-propelled grenade who was moving into position to target the Marines who were attempting to establish a new defensive line. The elimination of this threat bought precious time for the tactical withdrawal to be completed successfully. Corporal Chan reported that ammunition supplies throughout the base were reaching critical levels, with several positions requesting immediate resupply of both rifle and machine gun ammunition. However, the intensity of enemy fire made movement between positions extremely dangerous, requiring careful coordination and covering fire that further depleted their limited ammunition reserves. The tactical situation demanded that Maria make increasingly difficult decisions about target prioritization, as multiple threats appeared simultaneously across her field of vision. Her training had prepared her for such moments, but the reality of choosing which enemy fighter to engage when each successful shot could save the lives of multiple Marines created psychological pressure that tested her mental resilience. Her 10th engagement eliminated the leader of an assault team that was coordinating an attack on the eastern perimeter, where several wounded Marines were being treated in a partially collapsed bunker. The shot disrupted the coordination of the attack and caused confusion among the remaining fighters, providing the defenders with a brief respite to reorganize their positions. The enemy forces demonstrated their experience and training by adapting their tactics in response to the effectiveness of Maria's shooting. They began moving in smaller groups, using more concealment, and varying their approaches to make target identification more difficult. However, their need to maintain the momentum of their assault forced them to continue exposing themselves to her observation and fire. Radio communications revealed that medical personnel were performing surgery under combat conditions, attempting to save Marines who had been critically wounded in the initial bombardment. The medical tent had been struck by mortar fragments, forcing the corpsmen to work in a partially destroyed facility while under continuous threat from enemy fire. Maria's 11th shot eliminated a sniper who had been targeting the medical personnel, preventing what could have been catastrophic casualties among both the wounded Marines and the medical staff attempting to save them. The counter-sniper engagement required careful patience, as she had to wait for the enemy sniper to expose himself while he was attempting to engage other targets. The ammunition situation became even more critical when Corporal Chen reported that they were down to 43 rounds, with no possibility of resupply until the tactical situation stabilized. Each shot now carried enormous weight, as missing a target or engaging a less critical threat could mean running out of ammunition when it was needed most desperately. Colonel Mitchell's voice over the radio revealed that Higher Headquarters was coordinating multiple assets to provide assistance, but the earliest possible arrival time for significant reinforcement was still more than an hour away. The Marines would need to maintain their defensive positions despite mounting casualties and dwindling supplies for at least another hour of sustained combat. Maria identified a group of enemy fighters who were attempting to flank the main defensive positions by moving through a ravine that provided excellent concealment from most observation points. However, from her elevated position, she could observe their movement and engage them before they could complete their flanking maneuver. Her 12th shot eliminated the point man of this flanking element, causing the rest of the group to take cover and disrupting their coordinated movement. The successful interdiction of this flanking attempt prevented what could have been a devastating attack on the rear areas of the base, where wounded Marines and ammunition supplies were being protected by a minimal defensive force. The psychological pressure of continuous combat was beginning to affect everyone at the base, including Maria herself. The responsibility of knowing that her shooting ability was one of the few advantages they possessed against a larger and well-coordinated enemy force created mental stress that required constant management and focus. Corporal Chen observed that enemy reinforcements appeared to be moving into the area, suggesting that the assault force was even larger than initial estimates had indicated. The arrival of additional attackers would make their defensive situation even more precarious, as ammunition and personnel limitations made it impossible to sustain the current level of defensive fire indefinitely. Maria's 13th engagement eliminated a machine gunner who had established a position that was suppressing one of the key defensive positions on the northern perimeter. The elimination of this threat allowed those Marines to resume effective fire against the approaching assault teams, demonstrating the multiplicative effect that precise sniper fire could have on the overall defensive effectiveness. The enemy tactics evolved further as they recognized the threat posed by Maria's position, with several fighters now specifically attempting to locate and eliminate her observation post. Return fire was becoming more accurate and frequent, forcing her to move more often and limiting the time available for careful target observation and engagement. Radio traffic indicated that several Marines had distinguished themselves through extraordinary heroism, including Sergeant Rodriguez, who had single-handedly held a defensive position after the rest of his team had been wounded, and Corporal Williams, who had carried 2 wounded Marines to safety while under intense enemy fire. These individual acts of courage were crucial for maintaining defensive coherence despite mounting casualties. Maria's 14th shot eliminated a fighter who was attempting to destroy communications equipment with explosive charges. The preservation of communication capability was crucial for coordinating defensive efforts and maintaining contact with higher headquarters, making this target engagement critical for the overall survival of the base. The ammunition count continued to decline, with Corporal Chan reporting 38 rounds remaining in their immediate supply. Maria realized that each engagement now required even greater precision and target discrimination, as the luxury of warning shots or marginal engagements was no longer available. Colonel Mitchell's radio updates revealed that air support was being delayed due to weather conditions that had deteriorated in the area where support aircraft were based. Cloud cover and high winds were preventing immediate departure of close air support aircraft that could provide the fire superiority needed to break up the enemy assault. Maria observed that the enemy was preparing for what appeared to be a final coordinated assault on multiple sections of the perimeter simultaneously. The concentration of forces and the coordination of their movements suggested that they intended to overwhelm the defensive positions through sheer weight of numbers rather than continue the methodical approach they had been using. Her 15th engagement eliminated a fighter carrying explosives who was moving toward the main ammunition storage area. The successful interdiction of this threat prevented what could have been catastrophic secondary explosions that would have destroyed much of the base and killed many of the defending Marines. The tactical situation was reaching a critical point where the outcome would be determined by the ability of individual Marines to maintain their positions despite overwhelming odds and dwindling resources. Maria understood that her continued effectiveness as a sniper was one of the few factors that could influence the outcome in favor of the defending forces. Corporal Chen reported that radio communications indicated several positions around the perimeter were requesting permission to conduct tactical withdrawals to more defensible positions. However, the terrain and the intensity of enemy fire made such movements extremely risky, with the potential for heavy casualties during any repositioning efforts. Maria's 16th shot eliminated a fighter who was directing mortar fire from a concealed position, causing a significant decrease in the accuracy of indirect fire that had been making movement around the base extremely dangerous. The elimination of forward observers was always a high-priority mission, as their removal could dramatically reduce the effectiveness of enemy indirect fire support. The psychological impact of continuous combat was becoming evident among both friendly and enemy forces, with the sustained intensity of the engagement testing the limits of human endurance for everyone involved. However, Maria's training had prepared her for exactly these conditions, and she continued to function effectively despite the mounting pressure. Radio traffic revealed that medical personnel had performed several life-saving surgeries under combat conditions, with corpsmen demonstrating extraordinary skill and courage while treating wounded Marines in partially destroyed facilities. The survival of several critically wounded Marines was testament to both their medical training and their refusal to surrender to the circumstances. Maria identified a group of enemy fighters who were attempting to coordinate simultaneous attacks on 2 different sections of the perimeter, using hand signals and concealed communications to time their assault. The coordination of their movements suggested experienced leadership that understood the importance of overwhelming defensive positions through synchronized pressure. Her 17th engagement eliminated what appeared to be a senior leader among the attacking forces, causing visible confusion and disruption in the coordination of the assault. The elimination of leadership targets often had effects far beyond the immediate tactical impact, as it disrupted communication and decision-making among enemy forces. The ammunition situation continued to deteriorate, with 29 rounds remaining in immediate supply and no possibility of resupply until the tactical situation changed dramatically. Maria realized that the remaining ammunition would need to be reserved for the most critical threats, requiring even greater discrimination in target selection. Colonel Mitchell's radio communications revealed that higher headquarters was coordinating with multiple agencies to provide assistance, including possible special operations forces that might be able to reach their position more rapidly than conventional reinforcements. However, even these specialized units would require significant time to reach the forward operating base. Maria observed that enemy forces were beginning to show signs of exhaustion and casualties from the sustained engagement, with their movements becoming less coordinated and their fire discipline decreasing noticeably. However, their numerical advantage remained significant, and they continued to pose a serious threat to the survival of the defending Marines. Her 18th shot eliminated a sniper who had been targeting Marines attempting to provide medical assistance to wounded personnel. The counter-sniper engagement required patience and careful observation, as enemy snipers were becoming more cautious about exposing themselves after witnessing the effectiveness of Maria's shooting. The tactical situation demanded continuous adaptation as both friendly and enemy forces adjusted their tactics based on the evolving circumstances of the engagement. Maria's ability to read the battlefield and anticipate enemy movements was becoming increasingly important as the combat reached its most critical phase. The battle entered its most desperate phase as enemy forces launched their final coordinated assault on the base perimeter. Maria could observe multiple groups of attackers moving simultaneously toward different sections of the defensive line, their movements suggesting a level of coordination that indicated experienced military leadership among the enemy forces. Through her scope, Maria counted at least 60 fighters participating in this final assault, far more than intelligence estimates had suggested would be available for such an operation. The implications were sobering, as this level of enemy strength meant that the base was facing odds of more than 3-1, with ammunition running critically low and several defensive positions already compromised. Radio communications from Colonel Mitchell revealed that the western perimeter had been penetrated, with enemy fighters now inside the base perimeter and engaging Marines in close combat among the defensive positions. The situation required immediate response to prevent complete collapse of the defensive line, but Maria's elevated position limited her ability to engage targets that were now fighting at close range among friendly forces. Corporal Chen spotted muzzle flashes from enemy fighters who had established positions within the base perimeter and were firing on Marines attempting to defend the command post. The range was only 200 meters, well within the capability of her rifle, but the proximity of friendly forces required extreme precision to avoid hitting Marines who were fighting desperately to maintain their positions. Maria's 19th engagement eliminated an enemy machine gunner who had positioned himself to fire directly into the main defensive bunker where Colonel Mitchell was coordinating the defense. The shot required threading the bullet between friendly forces who were moving to counter the penetration, demonstrating the level of precision that had made her reputation among her fellow Marines. The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly, with radio reports indicating that multiple positions around the perimeter were being overrun by superior numbers of attackers. However, individual Marines continued to demonstrate extraordinary heroism, with several fighting to the last round to buy time for their fellow soldiers to reposition or treat wounded personnel. Ammunition reports from around the base indicated that most positions were down to emergency reserves, with some having exhausted their supply of machine gun ammunition entirely. The Marines were being forced to rely increasingly on individual rifles and whatever improvised weapons they could create from available materials. Maria identified a group of enemy fighters who were attempting to destroy the communications equipment that maintained contact with higher headquarters. The preservation of communication capability was crucial for coordinating any evacuation or reinforcement efforts, making this target engagement critical despite the challenging shot angle required. Her 20th shot eliminated the leader of this group, causing confusion and disrupting their assault on the communications bunker. However, the successful engagement also drew concentrated return fire from multiple enemy positions, forcing Maria to relocate once again while maintaining the ability to engage critical targets. Corporal Chan reported that the ammunition count had dropped to 22 rounds, with each remaining shot representing a critical resource that could determine the survival of multiple Marines. The psychological pressure of making such decisions under extreme combat conditions tested every aspect of Maria's training and mental preparation. Radio traffic revealed that medical personnel had established a triage area in the most protected section of the base, where they were treating in the unforgiving mountains of Afghanistan, where silence can mean survival and one wrong move spells death. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos had already proven herself among the elite. But nothing in her training had prepared her for the morning when 230 Marines would depend entirely on her steady trigger finger and unwavering resolve. This is not just another war story. This is the account of how one woman's extraordinary courage turned a devastating ambush into a testament of human determination. When the enemy thought they had cornered their prey at dawn, they had no idea they were about to face a sniper whose precision would become legend. What happened in those crucial hours would challenge everything the world thought it knew about combat, sacrifice, and the true meaning of holding the line when retreat is not an option.